So welcome to this month's community call. We've done a few more just security checks on this call where after the Q&A, if you want to ask a question, put your hand up, we'll unmute you and ask questions that way. We've kept the chat room open so you can still post things in the chat window. But we just want to make sure that we have a little bit more of a controlled meeting so that we admit people through waiting rooms and make sure that we have some, we don't have any offensive behavior. We apologize for anything that happened at the last meeting if you were attending on that. And so hence now we're just trying to make sure that we still open and good dialogue, but at the same time, we want to make sure that everyone has a safe and controlled manner in terms of how we run these community calls. So with that, I'm just going to share my screen. So here's our agenda. Ori is going to do a little overview of what we did in our 0.8 release, which was a couple of weeks back now. And then Yaron is going to cover a couple of features we put inside there. One are bi-directional bindings, and another one on an API authentication between your process and Dapr sidecar. Vinaya will talk about how we just did another breaking change in terms of how the Dapr CLI components path is set up. Will is then going to do a little bit about some asks about the Dapr dashboard that we want to sort of kickstart and get some community engagement with and feedback, and then we'll have our open Q&A. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. Ori, would you like to share, or I'll hand it over to you?
Yes, I'll share my screen real quick. Go. So, hello everyone. So as you know, 2 weeks ago we released Dapr version 0.8, and again with this release, a bunch of great new features. Hoping you already got to play with it a little bit and try it out. Kind of just to really go over the highlights, and the demos we're going to see are very much about these features. So we added a bunch of new pub sub components for support of MQTT, Pulsar, and AWS messaging services, as well as custom routes, which is something that we got as feedback from the community. So thank you for providing that feedback. And we actually showed that in the previous community call. So if you haven't seen that, feel free to check out the YouTube channel and see that community call where we showed it. Bi-directional bindings, that's something we're going to show today. And was also an ask from the community and was a result of a really great discussion. API authentication we're also going to show today, as well as trace header support. Yeah, so basically another thing to maybe call out is also the Python Actor SDK. You can, as always, find all the release notes and all the details in the releases on a tab on GitHub. So feel free to do that, and hoping you can check it out. And as always, kind of report issues that you find and see if you can help us also improve the docs, as always. Yeah, so just maybe one more comment before kind of I hand it over to the demos. As you know, we are also in the midst of 0.9. You can always go to the projects and see what we're working on. You can see we're really at the thick of it. And as always, if in the to-do list there's something you're passionate about or you see, and for those of you who have not maybe contributed and looking to do so, and if you find a good first issue, feel free to comment in that issue and see if you can take it on when we can assign it to you as well. So yeah, if you want to see what's coming up in the next one, you can always find it in the project sections of the Dapr dashboard. So yeah, that's it. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so then let's dive into some of what 8.0 is about, and we'll go through some of the breaking changes and some couple of new features we added in that side there. So, Yaron.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Let me just share my screen here. All right, let me know when you can see my screen.
We see it.
All right, great. Thank you, and good morning or good evening, anyone, depending on your time zone. I'm going to be just giving you a quick FYI about a breaking change that we had for Dapr 0.8 in regards to output bindings and the way that you communicate with them. So output bindings, for people who don't know what they are a way for an application to basically invoke an external system. So for example, if I wanted my application to send a message or actually bind something to Kafka system, this is how you would define a binding component in Dapr. So it's essentially a YAML file which follows the Kubernetes CRD structure. And here I define bindings.kafka and I have a bunch of metadata here, which is interesting for what we're going to talk about. It just has things like, the brokers and topics. And Dapr has about over 20, I think, different bindings, which are added constantly by people from the Dapr community. And if I'll take a look at the code, all it takes really to invoke that binding is to just form this URL here, calling to localhost, which is essentially calling Dapr here on 3500, calling the bindings API, and calling the sample topic binding, which is this thing here. So up until now, in order to invoke an output binding, you would only need to supply this really simple payload, which is what I'm highlighting here on line 16, which is essentially a JSON structure with data. So you can put anything you want in data. There's some metadata aspect, which I'm not showing here for simplicity. And the breaking change is essentially this operation here. And why did we put this operation required field here? Because a lot of people were saying, hey, it's great that you can one-way invoke external systems, but for example, what if instead of writing to a blob, storage account, I want to get a blob or list or delete. So we enabled change on 0.8 to basically be able to add features onto existing output bindings and, add new output bindings that support operations that do not necessarily lend themselves to create only. And then you can essentially, for example, create bindings with a get or lists operations. So just an FYI, all the Dapr bindings today support the create operation. In order to see which binding supports which operations, you simply need to go to our documentation. So inside the Dapr docs repository, you have reference, specs, and bindings. This is essentially where you'll find all of the Dapr bindings. And if you look at one, let's pick S3, for example, you will see that it has a supported operations section here. So the S3, for example, supports create. Like I said, each one of the bindings currently support create. For Dapr contributors, we really encourage you to go into our components contrib repository, which you can find here, Dapr/components contrib. Take a look at the bindings and help us start adding bidirectional support for bindings. So for example, S3 in Azure Blob Storage and Google Cloud Storage would greatly benefit the ability to get blobs and list blobs, and in addition to doing create operations. For example, same thing for Kafka, things like get topics, Kubernetes Event Hub, the ability to list the events. And that's in addition to input bindings, which trigger your application based on some incoming event. And, the output bindings up until now, which only would have let you one-way invoke an external output binding. So this is it, really. So this is just a change to be mindful of. If you're coming in from Dapr 0.7, you need to add that operation here. And if you're all new to Dapr, the changes have been made throughout all of our documentation to basically account for that. So you'll find it in samples, which is what we're looking at here. And you'll find it in the how-to documents and in the references. So with that, back to you, Mark.
Well, yeah, I want to give a chance to ask anyone who wants to ask any questions. Either kind of put your hand up or post things in the chat window, or we can also ask them all at the end. We'll have a a good 20-minute session at the end there. So that's
I think we have a rather packed agenda, so we might want to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then next up really is Yaron, so you can keep your screen sharing and working on to talking about the other enhancement that we did inside here, which was the API security between your code and between the Dapr CLI.
Yeah. So we'll be talking about API authentication between actually not just your application in Dapr, but any caller to the Dapr public APIs. So Dapr now leverages mutual TLS to encrypt traffic in transit. When one Dapr instance calls another, whether it's on Kubernetes or anywhere, you can have that encryption in transit. But then Dapr also has its APIs, which are user-facing, and we need to protect those too. So we enabled from 0.8 a feature called API authentication, which essentially follows the Dapr principles of having it really simple to define a token and then have Dapr use it for the access authentication. So I'm going to be demonstrating that, and then we'll open that for some questions. So what I have here is basically a Node app deployed onto Kubernetes, and this is the place to point out that API authentication for Dapr supports both Kubernetes workloads and also self-hosted workloads. So I'll also show you briefly how you can set up API authentication locally. And this just has the very basics of how do you get Dapr deployed. So we have annotations here. For those of you who don't know, this is how you tell the Dapr sidecar injector to inject the Dapr sidecar. It's an annotation saying Dapr enable true with the ID of the app and the port. So that's already deployed into my cluster. And I have a Kubernetes cluster here, and let me just zoom in a bit. And if I do kubectl get pods, I can see that I have a Node app application running here, and I have a Redis database in my cluster, and those make up what's needed for my application. And I also deployed a Redis Dapr component called state store. So what I'm going to do now is port forward to the pod that's running in my cluster. I'm going to port forward to 3500. So now I have a tunnel between the Kubernetes cluster, the Dapr container pod, and my machine. So I can go to Postman here, and I can issue a local call. So I'm calling localhost 3500. So I'm calling the Dapr sidecar, and here I'm calling the state API, targeting the state store, which is Redis, and I'm going to get the hey key. So I have a value there, which I saved prior to the community call, and I see that I can get the value. Now this is all nice, and now I basically want to put API authentication in place. So how do I go about doing that? The first thing to do would be to basically create a token. So here, just using Kubernetes primitives, I'm creating a secret of a type generic. I'm calling it Node app token. And essentially, I'm creating a token key inside, and here I have a JWT token. So this is pretty simple. I'm just creating a Kubernetes secret in the namespace of my application called Node app token with a token key containing the value, which is a valid JWT token. So I'm going to do that, and we can see that the Node app has been created. And then the only thing I need to do to tell Dapr to use that is to basically implement this annotation, which is Dapr.io API token secret. And this is a reference to the name of the secret, which I just created here. Node app token, Node app token. So I'm going to redeploy this application here, and we're going to go back and wait for it to be up and running. And we can take this pod name here, and I will just do a port forward to the new pod. All right. And if we go back here and I retry, I see that now I'm unauthorized because I'm getting an invalid API token. And the way I can enable this is to enable a header, which is Dapr API token with a value in place. And now I get the value back. So this works both for HTTP and gRPC. And this is, for example, quite useful in cases where imagine you have a malicious actor inside of your pod, and it tries to manipulate Dapr to get your state or mutate your state in any way or publish messages on your behalf. So in the cloud native space, the concept of zero trust networks really assume that the pod itself is a secured environment, and I sort of tend to agree with that. But then we want to make sure that because Dapr is essentially an API, We want to protect it also inside the pod. And this can also be used, for example, to direct external traffic coming in from ingress controllers to Dapr. So for example, if you're exposing Dapr APIs via traffic or Nginx to external entities, you can have API authentication, which is basically done by Dapr if you don't want to do it via an API gateway like Kong or API gateway or whatever. And so this is a pretty simple way in which you can do that. And the way you do this locally, if you're running Dapr run, which is the Dapr CLI that runs the Dapr daemon locally, you basically will export something called Dapr API token for your session. And you can just put the token here. And once you just run Dapr run, the application and the Dapr sidecar will run, and the Dapr sidecar will require authentication. So you can test this thing locally. Same thing, for example, if you're running Dapr on a virtual machine or locally hosted or anywhere. And with that, back to you, Mark.
Fantastic. There was a question from Johnny in the window, which I should pull up if you can pull it inside the chat. And his question was, could claims in the JOT token be used to scope access to certain parts of the Dapr API, i.e. this call app can only call state APIs?
Yeah, so this is a good question. And I think we're we might be able to do this for this API authentication, but I think that the middleware aspects of Dapr are really more geared towards scopes. So this is also a good place to mention that Dapr has a middleware concept where we have, for example, OAuth 2 authentication, and that's probably where you'll be putting scopes. Scoping and, for example, access lists and stuff like that are things that we've heard from users that we might add to Dapr going forward.
Good question. All right, if you have any other questions, pop your hand up and we're going to unmute you or post them in the chat window. Although Cecil says, I didn't realize you could use annotations like that. Is there an alternative to the command line options?
What are the command line options that you're referring to, Cecil?
We can unmute you if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, port and ID. Yes. I think he's asking about the annotations inside the Kubernetes deployment.
Okay, so what's the question really? An alternative. So on Kubernetes, let me share my screen again, and I will show. All right, let me know when you can see my screen.
You can see your screen.
All right. So on Kubernetes, this is how you tell the Dapr sidecar to configure the Dapr injector to configure the Dapr sidecar. So this annotation determines the ID, and this determines the port. When you're running Dapr locally, you will not be using this. For example, you'll be using Dapr run, right? So we have the ID here as part of the parameters to the Dapr CLI, and we have ports that you can specify on the Dapr CLI. Those parameters eventually get handed over to the Dapr daemon. So this is how you do it in Kubernetes, and this is how you do it for the Dapr CLI. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, he understands what Kubernetes.
Okay, good.
Good. All right, fantastic. All right, so what we will do now, thanks Yaron, those are, I mean, I think it's pretty key actually now. You'll see how we're trying to make sure that we're really clear on our security features across all of Dapr, not only between service to service, with MTLS now, but to the actual APIs themselves in terms of how you can lock them down and make sure that we're secure all the way through.
I think Jeff Daly raised his hand. He has a question.
Let me. Can someone unmute him?
Hi, how are you? Quick question for you. This is more general about Dapr. From an adoption and maturity perspective, I'm really looking forward to leaning in and bringing this to a couple of my customers that are already very Kubernetes focused, right? Where would you say we are from being able to lean into leveraging this in a mission critical production workload?
Good question. I mean, this is exactly what we're focused on at this point in time.
Right,
So,
I get it. You're ticking the right boxes, right? Authentication, that's good, right?
yes. Yeah, so, I mean, right now you can't use it in production. So let's just be clear on that.
Yep.
But the goal is to get it into a production stable v10 release this year.
Okay.
So, and what that means is that you'll see a number of releases now go out on a regular basis every month. And the goal is set by, just to be clear, there's two targets. We have what's called a set of fundamentals that we go through. Actually, they're actually all published inside the issues, and you can see them all inside the issues. And the fundamentals cover security. So, for example, over the last 2 weeks, we just had an external company do a security audit across the code base for Dapr. They raised a number of issues. It came up with some good threats that we had to mitigate. So that's one example. We're also doing perf and scale tests, so that we make sure that we publish perf and scale numbers and be clear about what the targets are inside there. And of course, we have to make sure, like, for example, when we put a lot of the tracing functionality in the 0.7 release, we realized that we affected perf. And so we had to be quite careful around where the tracing event went in. And then things like end-to-end tests and load tests. So we're clear around, we get tests across the things like the security tests that go from one service to another, as well as just end-to-end tests to make sure that we do tracing and other integration across the Dapr component. So those are sort of fundamentals. But then there's also a set of production customers that we're actually bringing Dapr production workloads, and so they're early adopters. They across a range of industries: fintech, IoT, manufacturing, and the goal is that when they get into production, it gives us the confidence that Dapr is going to be stable. So our goal is to get it to a 1.0 stable release this year, but of course it's always dependent upon the fact that we get and hit these fundamentals, and also the fact that to give us the true confidence, getting customers in production is the thing that really validates where we are, so that we don't simply just say, yes, we've got a nice code base, we've got people doing that. And if anyone wants to have a direct communication channel with us and have a project that they want to kick off, we're more than happy to do that.
Great, thank you very much.
And Mark, your video cam is off, I think.
Oh, okay, right. I'm going to put my camera back on here. All right, so with that, we're going to jump onto our next segment. We're going to jump onto another thing that we did inside 0.8, and Vinaya is going to share her screen. And we're just going to talk about some changes that we did about where you pick up the components path from. So Vinaya.
Hey, hi everybody. So thank you, Mark. So I'll be describing a components change, which is a components path related change, which is a breaking change, which we made with 0.8 release. Let me quickly share my screen here and let me know once you can see my screen. Give me 1 second. Can you see my screen?
No.
Not yet, okay.
Yes.
Okay, you can, okay. So earlier, before 0.8 release, when we do Dapr run, we used to create a components path folder in the current directory from wherever we are running Dapr. So if we had multiple Dapr apps, we could potentially end up with multiple component path directories, and that used to lead to some confusion. So with 0.8 release, what we have done is that we are creating now a common components path in the home directory of the user. And that will be used for all the applications that are run locally. So I can quickly demonstrate it. So this is just the Dapr version. So now when I do Dapr init, okay, so I will have a new .dapr folder created under my home directory and a components folder within that. And now when I do a Dapr run, this will be picking up the components that are created here. So here the default components are created under the home directory on a .dapr. Same way when I uninstall Dapr, we will get rid of this components folder. So this folder is deleted. Now, as before, like before 0.8 release, we could always specify a minus components path option, and we could point to our own components files. So this functionality is still available. The only change is that we assume that the users, if they're specifying a components path, they know what they're doing, and we won't touch the components path pointed to by the user at all. We won't create any default files there like before. And even during uninstall, this components path will be untouched. So that's going to be the change. So that's all. Any questions?
Yeah, so to be clear, I mean, what some of the feedback we got was that we had the CLI created this components folder for you all the time, and it kind of got a little bit annoying to have the component files there, which you see pubsub.yaml and the state store appear in that components folder underneath the subdirectory, and it would be nicer to have that instead of a central location where I could put them all there. But at the same time, now I can specify a components path if I do want to have a subfolder type approach underneath my project. So typically, if you do go down that path, you want to make sure there's a particular set of components that apply only to that particular application and service. You'll always provide the components path in effect, unless you want them all to be shared from a central location. Yeah, so questions on that?
Maybe one more comment. So the way we're kind of thinking about this is, you know, when you run Dapr init, it of course gets the binaries for Dapr, but it also kind of helps you really start working fast with Dapr by spinning up these Docker containers which we think are really useful for developers, the Redis one and the placement one. And those YAMLs are actually the ones that are kind of installed on default. And actually in 0.9, we're also going to move the creation of those YAMLs into the default component on init. And then that's kind of a little bit more of an atomic kind of operation. When we spin up like the developer environment, then those YAMLs will appear there as well. So we're doing this kind of in steps, but as mentioned by Mark and Vinaya, you can always, if you're doing something specific that's not the default environment that Dapr init sets up for you, you can always use the components path.
Yes. All right, with that, I'll hand over to Mark.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so now we're going to go on to our final piece of our segment, and that's with you, Will. And Will is going to talk about, we've had this Dapr dashboard that we've developed kind of at the beginning of the year, end of last year, actually, that we did. And we've sat there for a while now, and now we've decided that what we want to try to do is try to reinvigorate this. So I'll hand it to Will to talk about
Hi, Mark. So actually, I will be talking about dashboard. Okay, so there's a change here. So
shut up. Do you want to share your screen?
Yes, I want to share my screen. So Mark, let me know once you see the screen.
Yes.
All right. So hi, everybody. We like to talk about Dapr dashboard. So those of you who don't know that we have a Dapr dashboard capability, and it's with this Dapr dashboard, which is a web-based UI. This dashboard allows users to see information, view logs, and some of the actions through dashboard you can do on self-hosted and Kubernetes mode. So we have this Dapr dashboard repo, and it provides all the instructions and what are the features it currently supports. And so I would like to talk about this Dapr dashboard in that, as the agenda says, like it is like Dapr dashboard reloaded. So we started up this dashboard at the beginning, and now we are trying currently to enhance the dashboard experience and to add more capabilities. So let me show you what today Dapr dashboard provides. I have a demo. So I have a Kubernetes cluster, and when I spin up Dapr dashboard, so this is the view that we see. It should talk about all the it lists all the applications, the Dapr sidecars, and it provides some of the port informations. And if you see some of the actions, and I talk about what actions it provides right now. And there's a component view, which talks about which lists about what are the components we have. Like today currently in my cluster, I have a message bus, PubSub, trace exporters, Kafka. And we can also see the logs of a sidecar. So this is one of the my application add app. I'm currently seeing the Dapr logs. So this is, and this works both in standalone and Kubernetes mode. So this is what we have today features, and right now we are enhancing more functionality into the dashboard. And really the ask today in the community call is like first to talk about that there is a dashboard available through which you can see informations like components and all the Dapr sidecars. But the intent is like to get the feedback, like what are the capabilities or what are the enhancements you like to see in the Dapr dashboard. So for that, we really want your help to raise issues and talk about the create the issues and what the features you want to see. So this is what we have today. So any questions, like any feedback that you want to have it for?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, that's exactly the ask. You know, what sort of things we'd like to have. Are there some suggestions that you've already thought of? Like, I know we thought about doing something with actors, for example, and seeing a list of the actor types. That's sort of been one suggestion.
Yeah, and
yes.
And Sissel here commented on seeing logs in the dashboard, which Shalab, correct me if I'm wrong, we're planning to do.
Yes.
Yeah, so and I think also improving this kind of view of logs as well, so they're a little more.
Yeah, we are all right now enhancing the look and feel and the experience, as well as more information about configurations and more actions that user can perform. So we are now working on the dashboard thing, and really we need your feedback, like what capabilities we like to have it.
So there's a comment here, seeing the logs by service or by instance would be useful. So I think that would go into some of the plans for maybe improving kind of the log view of, so you can maybe filter or group things, or you know, just look at specific apps or specific modes of verbosity, or just search for keywords maybe. So by service, that's a good one.
All right. Yeah, we are considering this like providing a filter into the logs and selecting the specific application or Dapr logs. That's we have in plan, and having some configurations view there where we can see multiple configuration into the cluster.
And another comment here is feature parity for non-Kubernetes deployments. And absolutely, that absolutely makes sense. Everything here needs to kind of show Dapr where it's deployed, and not just Kubernetes. But I think with Kubernetes, there might be things that we can show additionally as well.
Yeah, I mean, there will be some platform-specific differences when it runs on Kubernetes or in self-hosted mode.
Yeah, but I think we strive to at least the basics, like which components are configured and showing all the apps. That will be across the board for sure. Yep. But that's thank you for that feedback.
Yes. All right, Mark. So back to you.
Okay, great. So we were going to have a special guest arrive today, and that was Jeff Holland, to do a demo on a piece of work that we've also been doing for integration between Dapr and Azure Functions. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to attend today, and we'll get him here along next time. But I kind of wanted to just kind of excite you a little bit in the sense of that hopefully next week you'll see an announcement that we'll be doing where we will be we've done a piece of work in conjunction with the Azure Functions team where we've built Azure Functions bindings around each of the Dapr building blocks. And so what that means as a function developer, you will be able to go in and take advantage of Dapr as part of Azure Functions. So for example, say you wanted to publish a message between one function and another using the Dapr pub sub building block, you'll be able to add a function binding that allows you to configure the pub sub component of your choice to be able to publish and subscribe messages between function bindings. This will be running on the functions host, so it won't be part of the function service. So this mostly will be constrained for now to be able to where the function host runs, for example, inside your Kubernetes cluster or inside your sort of IoT Edge device or wherever the function hosts run. In due course, of course, as we came back to the question I talked about earlier, as Dapr gets to a stable release and we get more adoption of this, you know, we are all looking towards how Dapr gets into actual services itself, but that's going to take a little longer yet. Then you won't see any of Dapr in any of the Azure services this year for certain. It'll be sort of a next year thing. But that piece of work of integrating with Dapr functions, in fact, if you saw how we did the Dapr and workflows and logic apps, you'll see that Dapr is being integrated with different runtimes across the place. We've done it with ASP.NET Core, we've done it with functions, we've done it with logic apps, we've now done it with functions. And we'll get him along here in 2 weeks' time and get him to show you a bunch of demos then. So it'll be pretty exciting. Meanwhile, watch out for hopefully the announcement next week on the Microsoft open source blog, where we do our announcements on some of these things. So with that, we have about 20 minutes left, and we're on a chance now for anyone to either open up your mic, you put your hand up, open up your mic, or post some questions that you'd like inside the chat window. This is a time for you to ask any question that you like. Feel free to ask about the one around timelines, around particular feature sets, open up a particular issue, dive into a particular API. You know, there is no question that we won't attempt to try and answer in terms of making sure that we're kind of open and transparent about where we're going with this. So feel free to put your hand up inside the window or post questions inside the chat window. So with that, Kai asks, do you also plan to have Dapr method invocations available then from Azure Functions durable task activity triggered functions? So at this point in time, the work that we've done doesn't. Okay.
I think Mark, if I'm not mistaken, and I might very well be,
yes,
but if I'm not mistaken, I think Azure Functions bindings, binding extensions can in fact be used from durable task frameworks. So if that's the case, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to use the Dapr extension from there.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. From just the durable task framework?
And I mean from the durable functions, which uses the durable task framework. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that actually is something that we have better try out beforehand. We've actually focused a lot on the functions. They do allow durable functions do allow you to run durable task functions bindings. So the idea is it should work.
Yeah.
I mean, if durable functions is available as a container image to run on your Kubernetes environment, then yes.
Yes, good question.
But we can check with our friends there and get back to you.
Yes. And you'll be able to hopefully ask all these detailed questions of Jeff in our community call in 2 weeks' time, because we'll get him onto that as well. All right, so Sandra asks, if I want to send some HTTP header from service A to service B, is it possible with the Dapr client class inside .NET SDK?
Aman, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
So I'll just start by saying that yes, it's possible with HTTP and gRPC native, for sure. The Dapr client, I am not so sure.
I think it takes a metadata dictionary and you can put stuff in there.
So not on the HTTP context thing, you mean provide the C# metadata class to the Dapr client, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Sander?
And we can open up your mic if you want to talk. Here we go.
Okay, sounds good, Sander. Thank you.
Oh yeah. Thanks, guys. Yeah, I'll check the code. The reason I'm asking is because I'm also looking to see how the bearer middleware is working. So I want to pass a bearer token from one source to the other. And up till now, I'm using only the Dapr client for everything. So if possible, I want to stay with the Dapr client instead of also having to do HTTP client request.
Yeah, that's
But
totally
the
we write these higher level SDKs so that they'll have feature parity with the protocol primitives. So yeah, it makes sense that you'll want to and be able to stay within the confines of the SDK.
yeah, so I'll recheck the code to see if I can work with the metadata, and if not, I'll create an issue. So thanks.
Sounds good. Yep, thank you.
Okay, Matthias asks, and I'll unmute you if you want to ask your question as well. And it goes, are there plans to deliver Dapr in combination with IoT Edge so that you get more flexible in regards to connected additional resources like storage, queue, etc.? I think if your question is will we be able to run Dapr on IoT Edge as a hosting environment, then yes, that's on the plans. In order to do that, where in the same way that you see Dapr run in self-hosted mode on a single VM machine, and also we've shown how it integrates and runs inside Dapr, we're also targeting IoT Edge as a hosting platform there. You know, today, the majority of building blocks inside Dapr don't actually require any dependency on the host platform. So for example, PubSub itself can just run, and you can use PubSub without any host dependency. But there are, of course, there's the control plane pieces of Dapr, such as the Sentry service, and also that you have to be able to get launched and run inside the host environment, as well as, you know, if you want to make service invocation depend upon some resolution service. So that's the goal. I don't know if that answers your question, so we can get more flexible in regards to connecting additional resources like storage and queues. The answer is you should be able to use the existing Dapr components even in the IoT Edge environment.
Yeah, there are, I think it's Vitaly Slepakov who did some testing on that. It's also a blog mentioning that, but I'm just interested in getting it more, let's say, professional.
Yes. So our idea is we're going to be going down the path of creating an IoT Edge module, which will be, you know, allow you to launch the Dapr as a sidecar, and you're going to use that as the, you know, the official deployment mechanism for Dapr.
That would be great. Yeah. Thank you.
That's in our 1.0 plans. We basically got 2 customers who are actually going into production with that scenario. So we're using them to validate it.
That's interesting because we plan production as well, but with the test car. So perhaps we could talk about that also as well, because it's pretty interesting. We're trying to use IoT Edge as delivery model for running on a K8s and on Edge as well. So we can deliver our module through IoT Edge in both environments, in a customer on-premise version and in a cloud-based version. So that would be great if there are any active plans.
Yeah. Well, feel free to reach out or send an email to me at mfussell@microsoft.com, and you know we can talk offline about your projects, and we'd love to hear more about what you're taking to production. And yes, so our active plans are to support Dapr on IoT Edge as a first-class module.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes. And then George posted a great article by Vinaya, actually, who is one of the people actually we're working with, who's working with one of our customers to do that, to make sure it runs on IoT Edge. But we haven't done anything official here yet ourselves. We're sort of just getting up to speed. You'll see more activity of this happen over the next few months, because we're now getting into the point where we actually have to do it. We'd like to make use of that as well. Great, thanks, Ray. And good to hear. Yeah, says Yaron.
So Sander asked a question, I think. Any plans for making listing all keys available in state store components?
So I think your scenario here is that you want to get back more than just a single key, yes? You want to be able to get back a list of keys. Is that the scenario?
I think you might want to unmute him.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the scenario is I'm looking at eShop on containers and trying to Dapperize that. And one of the things they do is when a price updates, they want to know the keys of all the baskets. So each shopping basket is stored under a separate key. So they basically want a list of all the keys in the state store. So I don't really need all the values to return as well, just a list of the keys.
So you don't want to send that. It's not getting the values back for a list. It's not like here's 5 keys, give me back the values of 5 keys.
No, it's more like what are the keys in the database, and then you can iterate over that to do something with it. And in the eShop scenario, it's a little bit weird because it's a demo and it's fine, but it's not really scalable the way they do this. But I can see it being useful for some other scenarios.
Yeah, I think that getting multiple keys should be fairly easy to do. And I think there's already an issue for that. That's separate from supporting, SQL query interfaces. It should be mentioned. So just providing Dapr with a list of keys and then having, one call instead of thousands potentially is pretty easy for us to do. So we might see that.
Yeah, I think that batch side of things is important. But yeah, at the moment we haven't got any plans to do any query on top of that. Although we keep getting asked about the scenario quite a bit because yours is more of a query. Give me back a list of all the keys.
Yeah, it is. And the alternative I was thinking about was using the Redis binding and then a output binding, right? So a Redis binding with a list operation on it.
So
that
you
would probably work as well, I guess.
You could enable list operations on an output binding. Yes, that's correct. That's why we put the bi-directional bindings in place to unlock those scenarios. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's another way you can do this. So the batch idea of things, but query at this point in time, we haven't got any plans for 1.0, but it's a constant ask. And I think that we're going to just have focus on is the type of, we were trying to be careful that we're not going too far down a path of creating a query engine, because that's not the goal of Dapr to build that thing. But I can see there are simple queries that we certainly need to be able to support at some point.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
So Dave, you have some questions. I have unmuted you.
Yeah, hang on. It was more a little bit of the input on the edge cases. One thing that might be very useful is if you just had a manifest directory that gave you all the manifests for the, for everything that would work to deploy Dapr, on ARM64, for example, or, some of the other platforms that all the components that it could use would be tested. And then that can be very easily used, like if you're using K3s, to just pre-deploy as part of the cluster, because you just put the manifests in a directory when you deploy it, and it auto deploys everything that's in there without you having to do it. So I'm not sure which things will work on ARM of all the options, like for PubSub and all the other Dapr commonly used things, but it might be a good idea if there was, something kept curated of just where you can grab that directory of manifests that will work on ARM, and off you go with, very quickly getting a case 3 cluster running.
Yes, so I mean, and when you say manifest, it's like a drop.
The standard Kubernetes, .yaml files. If you just stick them in a directory, I don't know if you're familiar with K3s.
I'm not so familiar with K3s, no.
K3s is a lightweight Kubernetes, CNCF certified distribution from the Rancher folks, specifically designed for very, very, very low memory. In other words, everything is all compiled into one image, and that's all that runs on the host. But for edge cases and things where you want to pre-configure a device, you just stick the manifest you want in a directory, and you know, a single command starts it up, and that's it.
Yeah.
So rather than everybody having to figure out what there's, you know, ARM versions of and everything else,
Yes.
if you could just keep that curated, that will work, you know, for the most common pub sub, the most common, you know, state store and things like that, that will work all the time on ARM. It's probably a very easy way to, you know,
actually, that's good. Yeah,
pull
that's
over
good
the hurdle.
suggestion. Yeah.
It is. So Dave, just to get that clear, so what you're suggesting is like to create like an IoT K3's recipe
Yes.
for, you know, set of technologies that are known and certified to run under ARM, you know, enabled environments.
Right, and curated, you know, the deployment files for it, that so that you're not spending, you know, hours or days trying to say, well, no, that sort of works, that sort of works. You know, it's just part of the verification. Because
that's good feedback.
K3 is getting a lot of momentum since it's been, you know, GA for about 6 months now. And it's going to have full fleet support very soon, before the end of the year within Rancher.
All right. Maybe we should get K3 and Dapr demo.
Yeah, I think we should do that.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for the feedback. I think that's a great idea. We're going to go spend time on that. Yes.
And then Anthony Davis had a question.
I think we've unmuted you, or I've unmuted you.
Yes, hi everyone, and thanks for having these calls. Question about API authentication. So we currently generated a JET token in our API gateway. And then I think as kind of related to what Sanders' first question was about HTTP headers, we pass that along in, you know, as an authorization bearer token to our services, and use the JET bearer middleware to validate the token and authorize against any claims in it on our endpoints. With the introduction of the API authentication piece for Dapr, how does that change? Do we have to juggle two tokens, or
so the question is, how do you handle your own JOT token for your application authorization scenarios with the Dapr API authentication, right?
Yes, or can we use the same? Does it have to be two? I assume it does, otherwise it wouldn't.
Well, the answer is yes to both. So what I would suggest you do is use the Dapr API authentication to authenticate access to Dapr. And then once that's allowed, because Dapr is sort of a proxy to your application, right? And then you continue carrying along your JET token for your application. And there you basically treat that as an authorization piece for your app. So you'll have two separate tokens. If you want to, and if your token is exposed inside the Kubernetes cluster as a secret, so you can very easily tell Dapr to use your existing token as its own API token. So you'll basically just be able to use the same thing for both. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. And if you have any more questions, I'll reach out over Gitter or, you know, open an issue.
Okay, appreciate it.
No problem.
I guess, are you about to close? I have another question. But
no, go far away. Ask a question.
All right. So the change with the components subfolder.
Yes.
When it's centralized like that, isn't that going to cause issues? Because don't we have to change those YAMLs, and then if there are different projects that are referencing them, they're going to be only fit for one of the projects.
Yeah, I can take that question. Yeah, that's a good point. So you're absolutely right, and I think this is where we advise you to use the components path flag when you're doing Dapr run. Yep. I think the default ones were kind of like need to kind of be categorized together with the developer environment we're setting up. Anything beyond that you want to do, and of course you would want to do as you kind of build more sophisticated stuff, we kind of let you manage it. That's why, as Vinaya mentioned, we also don't touch those once we do an uninstall. Mostly, I think the idea is to kind of let you very much be aware of the side effects of everything the CLI did, because what we noticed was people were running Dapr run from different places, even for the same application, and those components folders started popping up in different places, and sometimes they would be committed together with code, and it would just create some mess because people were not always aware of this side effect. So we just try to kind of improve that.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, so with that, we're out of time. Thank you for this call today. If you want to ask any more questions, go and ask them on our GitHub forum, or feel free to post issues. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time, which will be in July. There, we'll certainly have Jeff turn up and show the functions demo. And meanwhile, if there are other things you'd like to see in this community call, if you'd like to see demos of particular things, or if you would like to do a demo even, we'd love to have people come along and show demos of things that they've built. That would be fantastic as well. So feel free to engage us in multiple ways that you can, and we'll have these calls now every 2 weeks, so we can keep this channel open and have a chance for you to ask questions. Right, and I'll say thank you for everyone today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.